All right. Howdy. Welcome back. So last time we worked on our first test method, and so today we're going to move on to the next one. We're in the Adventure Park Trigger in the Apex Wilderness. And so this is going to be the same thing, right? In the last one, what we saw was we learned how we want to structure our unit tests. So we understand that there's a given, there's a when, and there's a then. In the given, we have our data that we're creating. Our when is the event or change that occurs in the data, and the then is the automation results that we expect to happen. And we also talked about renaming our unit tests because a test called test updating a park gives us little to no context. We don't know at all what this test is trying to accomplish. So it's not like the worst thing in the world, but it doesn't really help us. And we want to do everything we can to get higher quality code. So this will help us get higher quality code. Okay, so let's look at the next one here. And we'll just take a look and kind of see what they're doing as well. See if we can kind of get an idea of what's happening and then where the change is coming in. So we create a park. We're going to create a lead. And then we create a thing called a park of interest. So we can see that this is a junction object between lead and adventure park. And it begins as inactive. So it looks like this is something related to the lead is interested in a particular adventure park. And so this is the record we use to create that connection. Then we can see after we've created this park of interest, we update its open date. And then when that's updated, we're going to check to see if the park is active. And then after that happens, we have a park is active as false. We set it to false. And we have a new open date. And we update the park again. And then we can see there's an inactive date. And then once the inactive date comes in, we are now looking at the updated park of interest to see that it is also inactive and that the inactive date is copied over from the date from the park. So if you think about it, it would kind of make sense. There's an adventure park, and those adventure parks probably open. You probably have the business has to prepare those for a while. And then once they're ready to have a grand opening, then people's can register interest for taking an adventure there. And then if that park, for whatever reason, was inactivated or closed, then all the related people that would want to go there really couldn't go there anymore. So you would have to have an inactive date for it. The problem with this test method is that it does more than one thing. We don't really want that to happen. These are disparate business pieces of business logic. So this really should be two tests because the first time what we're doing is we're changing the opening date to make sure that when that open date happens, if there's a park of interest, that it becomes active. Maybe people can register interest in a park before it opens, but we need to know that those POIs, the parks of interest, are still inactive. So what this is doing is that part of it, that part of the business process. And then this is a completely separate part of the business process. So in my mind, this is a very lazy test, and it's not a very good test because it's mixing these two different pieces of logic. So we're going to keep that as our understanding, and we're going to break this out into two, which should be pretty easy to do. All right. So let's go ahead and copy this. Create a new one. And we'll just call this updating a park 2. And we will set the park directly with an open date in our second one. And inactive is false. So we'll set inactive to false. And now we don't need this assertion. Okay, so now we can also remove this, everything that happens after the first assert. So this will break it into two separate tests. In the first test, we're checking that it becomes active when it has an open date, which means that this is our given context. We have a park, we have a lead, we have a park of interest, that inactive is false, and then we have our when. And then now we're going to fetch that adventure park to see that it's active because it has an inactive date. And now from this context, we can see that this doesn't even make sense. We don't even really need the park of interest because we're not really testing anything related to it. All we're really doing is we're checking the park and the lead, and then whenever this park is updated, we're going to make sure it's active now. So we would expect that when it has an open date, then it becomes active. And this is really just setting the stage for whenever we actually look into the code to refactor. We shouldn't try to have all of our tests necessarily completed. It's not necessary. We're going to find gaps. We're going to find places in our code where we should have more coverage, and we're going to have places where we have good coverage. And we'll have a little bit better insight onto what the code's doing. So in this case, we can say that this test now should activate a park when it has an open date. Now, we don't know if that's actually what the code should do, but from the test perspective, from where we're starting now, that's what we think it's supposed to do, right? And in this case, we do need the park of interest. So in this case, it is important because it's part of our validation to make sure that whenever the park is inactivated, that the related parks of interest are deactivated. So in this case, this is our given, that we have a park, we have a lead, and we have a park of interest. So our when is going to be this. We set the inactive as false, just to be careful for it being very explicit. And we can see that the open date too has a little bit of meaning too. So it's not really that it just has an open date, it's that it has an open date. This is like a past one. So its open date has expired. And when that happens, it's going to deactivate the park. So this is the trigger for this. And we're going to check the inactivated date. So it looks like that's going to copy over. And then we're going to check that park of interest to make sure it is deactivated. And now that we see that, we can go ahead and give a name. So this also does two things, but they're two separate things. These are the same things that happen from the same update of the data. That's why you may have multiple kinds of assertions because multiple things happen, but it's the same when. That's your criteria, right? We want to have, when there's different whens, we want to have different tests, and then we'll check out our different thens. So, should add an activation date and deactivate related POI when open date has expired. Okay. And then the last thing we can do is we can see that now we don't even need the lead here. And so every kind of small incremental improvement, we're clarifying this, we're refining these tests, we're making them more and more simplified and to the point. Um, if you wanted to have a little bit more elaborate test data in the future, that's a different matter and it could be helpful. But in this case, for now, all we really are testing is to see when the park changes. So in this case, we don't even need the lead and we can see how much simpler this is. So now if we were to come back in this and look at this test in a year or 2 years, or if someone else were to come and look at our test in a year or 2 years, they might have an idea of what we're trying to accomplish in the automation. And that's the goal. So that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and run all of our tests and make sure we're still good. Uh-oh, we have a fail. So let's check it out. Okay, so this is saying that it should be inactive, but it's not inactive. So that's interesting, right? So that means that it could have been the case that the test that we had before was a little messed up. So in this case, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We have an idea that this test that we came to before we made any changes had too many responsibilities. So this is where our version control helps out, right? So we made all these changes. We know a little bit more than we used to know, but we broke our test, and that is not good. We don't necessarily know why our test is broken, but we know that it broke. So we're going to just remember this when we get into the code. So what we're going to do is we're going to discard our changes. We're going to deploy, and we can double check to see, yep, we went back to our starting state. And now we're going to run our tests again. And this is the life in the wilderness, right? This is the life in the apex wilderness, is that you do things that make sense and it seems like it's right, and then you find out that it's not right, but you may or may not know why. So version control is a saving grace. It's kind of like a breadcrumbs that make sure you can find your way back when you get lost. So now, though, even though we haven't made any changes, we know more than we did when we started. And even though it looks like there's little progress, we actually did make progress. So we're going to go ahead and press pause on this for now. In the next video, we're going to pick up digging into the code itself so that we can really see what it's doing and start untangling our mess. All right, I'll see you there.